Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing yet another horror I have watched lately, although this video should not be titled horror I've watched lately, kind of more like non-horror, drama, psychological, thriller-ish, action comedy, dark horror, dark comedy, that's what I meant. I don't think any of these movies actually do fall under the category of horror. You tell me if you disagree. I think some of them have horror elements, but definitely not horror movies. Hope that's okay. I watched them thinking they were gonna be kind of horror movies and with the intent of reviewing them, also reviewing them because they've been requested that I talk about them. So the movies we're gonna be discussing today with timestamps linked down below are Swallow, Come to Daddy, Guns Akimbo, and Super Dark Times. So before we get into the video, I just want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of different types of classes, from video editing, which is super helpful, to design, to creative classes such as journaling, creative writing. Lately, I think Skillshare has been a great way to break up the monotony of things and add a little bit more structure to our day-to-day. There's a little bit of a routine I think we're all falling into, being indoors this whole time, and it's fun to kind of take a creative challenge class or productivity class. One class that I'm excited about is called Productivity Today, Managing Attention in the Digital Age by Kevin Siskar, which is all about reducing distractions and how to focus, which is so hard to do with all this technology around us, especially that we're at home all the time. I've always been kind of bad at this, even though I've worked at home for 7 years now. It's really hard managing distractions and like balancing work life, especially in a one-bedroom apartment. So the first 1,000 subscribers to click the link in my description box will get 2 free months of premium membership, and after that it's only around $10 a month. Alright, we're gonna start with Swallow, which came out last year and stars my girl, Haley Bennett. She's from Haunting of Molly Hartley, in case you didn't know. I will say her acting definitely improved as she got older. Her acting is so amazing in Swallow. So this movie follows a newly pregnant woman in a seemingly perfect marriage who develops the disorder pica, which causes her to eat inedible and dangerous objects. So I do want to reiterate, I'm only discussing this on my channel and reviewing it because it was requested for me to do so, and because thriller and horror are genres used to describe this movie. Otherwise, it is completely not a horror movie, and I think the marketing does a huge disservice to this movie. We do cringe sometimes at some of the objects that she eats, and there is a disturbing factor there, but this movie is so much more than that. I would say this movie would be better described as a psychological drama film rather than a horror film. And it's really about a girl dealing with the effects of trauma. So this movie is so much deeper than it appears to be in the trailer or in its marketing. And I think this is actually a great representation of the disorder pica and how it helps people cope when they are dealing with trauma. I think you guys know how I feel by now about mental illnesses being portrayed in especially horror movies. It could be done really well without exploitation, and I do think this movie did that overall. It was just the marketing that would be the downfall for this movie. And I think I actually really enjoyed this movie so much more than if it was just a straightforward horror film, because this is a very good psychological mental illness film. And I'm actually really glad and relieved they didn't go the super horrific route or make it super dark. And it wasn't horrifying because we're watching this woman struggle with this new life and this new situation that she's in, being pregnant and dealing with loneliness and her trauma from her past. And I really loved this movie, especially the ending, which is very controversial. You have to watch it to know what I'm talking about. If you've seen it, you know the ending. I think it's a very happy ending, and not everyone's gonna think that, and I think it's going to be very polarizing. And maybe it's just because I have very strong empathy and I could understand her choices, her impulses, and her decisions. So there's nothing horrifying about this movie, so please do not go into it thinking it's going to be a horror movie, because in no way is it. Like I said, we cringe when she eats things that aren't supposed to be eaten, but that is part of the pica disorder, so it's very realistically represented here. I would give this movie a 9 out of 10, not on the horror scale in any way, but just as a great psychological drama movie. Next up, we're gonna talk about Come to Daddy, which also came out last year. This horror comedy stars Elijah Wood and Stephen McHattie from Pontypool, actually, and follows Norval, who hasn't seen his dad in 30 years, as he visits his dad at his remote cabin. He discovers his dad is kind of an asshole and has a pretty weird past that seems to be catching up to him. This movie is so hard to explain without going into more detail than that. Like, that's really all we can say about this movie without spoiling it, because it is just so much. It's so much. It's so weird, first of all. Elijah Wood, amazing. He's one of my favorite actors, and he plays a very privileged 30-year-old millennial kind of character who like brags, and he lives in LA, and it's just very believable. I have seen different reviews about this movie as far as which half is the better half, because it's very much two different kind of movies. I think it really catches me in the first half and kind of loses me a little bit along the way, just because it gets very, very convoluted and weird that you cannot expect literally anything from this movie. Like, you will never know what is going to happen next. And nothing about this movie is predictable in any sense. So in that way, it's really enjoyable because you are literally on a roller coaster. Like, you're just being whipped around, so many twists and turns. You're just like, what is going on? It is a really fun movie, and I genuinely think the humor, especially in the first half, was actually really good. I think it's because I love the actors in the beginning so much. I'm very, very picky when it comes to comedy in horror, and not all the jokes are great, not all the comedy is good, but a lot of it was pretty decent for me. So like I said, this video, it has no horror movies in it, so obviously it's not much of a horror movie. There are some dark parts for sure, and pretty decent gore, but it definitely leans more comedy than horror, but dark comedy would sum up this movie pretty well. I do think it tried to be much more complex than it needed to be. There was just like one too many like characters, twists, things happening, and the ending was okay. So it kind of lost me in the second half of the movie, but I was never bored, that's for sure. I would give this movie a solid like 8.5, 8 out of 10. Purely for the actors, I think that really carried this movie. Elijah Wood is great. It's still highly entertaining, and I would recommend it if it sounds like something you would normally watch. Next up, we have Guns Akimbo, another 2019 movie. There's just 3 of them in here. This one is very much not a horror, maybe not even a thriller. Like, this movie is just so bizarre. I still thought I'd talk about it because it has Daniel Radcliffe in it, one of my favorite actors. That has nothing to do really with horror, but he's been in horror before. Guns Akimbo follows Daniel Radcliffe as a video game developer who accidentally becomes the next participant in a real-life death match that streams online. His opponent is played by Samara Weaving, which I actually really enjoyed in the role, and it shows her range as an actor. The movie, 100% a comedy movie, and it wasn't too bad. Some of the comedy was very bad and very just, it almost felt like 2010 humor, just like weird jokes, I don't know. Very, very over the top. The entire movie felt like a video game in itself, and I think that was very intentional. You definitely have to be in the right mood for this movie because everything is over the top. There is nothing subtle about this. I mean, Daniel Radcliffe has guns surgically attached to his hands. The movie overall is very cheesy and predictable and just a wild ride. That being said, like Come to Daddy, I definitely wasn't bored throughout it. It was very entertaining. It never slows down. I don't think I'll rewatch this movie, but I do feel like it's kind of one of those movies that you would put on at a party or like with some friends and make them watch it because it's just so bizarre and like everyone's gonna have a good time laughing at it. I did see a review that said to switch off your brain and enjoy some mindless fun, and I think that definitely sums up the point of this movie. It's not deep or anything like that. The actors were fantastic in this. I think Samara Weaving was so good, and you just kind of have to have suspension of disbelief that this would all be happening at all. Some of the characters are just very too powerful for their own strength, if that makes sense. They're just unbelievable in a way. The characters aren't believable. It's definitely not going to be for everyone though. Overall, myself, I'd give it a 6.5 out of 10 because it's just one of those romance that isn't really my cup of tea, but it wasn't boring, if that makes sense. I didn't hate it. It was just not my kind of comedy or plot or anything like that. All right, lastly, we're gonna talk about Super Dark Times that came out in 2017. It is streaming right now on Netflix, and I actually saw well, I got the idea to watch this through TikTok. Sometimes you get those TikToks that say like the 4 most disturbing movies on Netflix, or like watch these movies right now kind of thing. Love those. So I saw Super Dark Times on one of these lists and I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. So this movie is listed as a crime drama horror and follows 2 best friends in what appears like a normal coming of age movie that turns gruesome after an accident that drives a wedge between them. I literally thought this was an A24 movie up until I watched it, and I did not see that A24 pop up on the screen. I don't know why. Even watching it throughout, I'm like, am I sure this isn't an A24 movie? It just feels like that. It has the A24 vibe. So if you really enjoy A24 movies, you'd probably really like this movie. It was a pretty slow burn. My boyfriend was very bored throughout, but I think that the actors were amazing in this and really carried this movie, and it made it feel so believable. Like they felt like real people, which really added to the disturbing and dark parts of this movie because it felt like we knew people like that at some point in our lives. And obviously I mentioned there's like an accident, and this first kind of dark scene is a little bit predictable, but still very, very intense when it happens. It's because they build up this suspense and it all feels very real, whereas normally if something like that happened in another horror movie, it wouldn't be anything shocking to us. But because of the tone and the atmosphere, the score of this movie was incredible. They knew how to drive your emotions when you're watching this movie based just on the music alone. It's just such a smart movie and so well done. And it does actually get a lot darker throughout. I thought when the first kind of thing happened, it was gonna be that, and then they're just dealing with that event, but it does get very intense as it goes on. I also recommend looking into some theories after you watch this as to, I've seen some articles talking about who's the real villain, which I think is a great concept, and the kind of meaning of why they chose to do certain things in the movie. It's definitely more of a slow burn type psychological realistic drama horror thriller. I don't even know what you'd call this, but the visuals were great. It was a very simple, like simplistic type storytelling, and the actors, like I said, were amazing. They carried it hands down. I'd give it an 8 out of 10 personally, and highly recommend. So that's not even the horror I've been watching lately. That's just some movies I watched lately. I guess I want to branch out and do more thrillery things too, but I have gotten some requests for these movies, so I thought I'd cover them in one of these videos. Like always, if you want to request me review a specific movie in this format, please leave it down below, or just any movie in general you want me to watch, leave it in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.